Well, it's good to be back with you for another day as we are continuing on through our 25-day journey of Advent using the Jesse tree, 25 different symbols and stories in the Old Testament leading up to the New Testament and the story of Jesus Christ, which hopefully will give us a better sense along this journey of Advent into the character of God, the reason for the coming of the Messiah, and also we're journeying through some of the odd characters and personalities that are a part of Jesus' family tree. Any of us who have family or who have spent any time with family over the years understands that they're oftentimes a bag of mixed nuts. And sometimes Jesus' family tree was as well. So hopefully that will give you some peace this holiday season as you journey through the joyous walk through Advent to Christmas. Now, if you'd like to join us on the journey, super easy to do. All you need to do is go to that URL right there, go.christtable.today/jessetree. Information there about everything that's going on in the study, how you can be a part. And then if you want to find out more about Christ Table, the group that puts this on and makes this possible each and every day, you can go right there to www.christtable.today. Sign up for the email list there. Consider giving financially if the Lord leads you to do that. We are only here because of your gracious generosity, and we send materials and resources directly into your home as a thank you gift for being a part of partnering with us. Well, why don't we go ahead and jump in? Our text today is Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 36, which I will just warn you is the entire chapter of Genesis 37. Now, here in the Bible study, we're going to just kind of bite off a chunk of that story, but I want to encourage you to grab your Bible at some point today, pull it out, blow off the dust or pull out that electronic device and read the rest of the story. This is a fascinating story. It's a compelling story. And here in the study, we will just initially kind of set up some of the background of what's going on here, but then you will continue to see play out what we begin to unpack in the rest of the story. And if you're doing this with kids, you can obviously make a decision as to how much you do, but your kids, whether you want to admit it or not, if they are able to talk, then they are able to understand the disconnect between what families should be and how we speak about how families should be and how it actually is. And it might be difficult to do or to hear, but I would encourage you that if you do have kids and you're taking them through this journey, that you might open up the conversation on the ways in which mom or dad or whoever is kind of responsible in the household mirrors some of the issues that we find in this story. Might be a great opportunity for you to learn how to do better. Something that we can all learn. Our ornament for today is appropriately, because we're talking about Joseph, who had that amazing Technicolor dream coat. So our ornament today is this coat, and that will be central to the story of Joseph because it is a symbol of something else. And so Joseph obviously Jacob gives Joseph a coat, but it's not necessarily the coat itself that is the concern, I don't think, but it's what the coat signifies. And that might be actually another conversation to have with kids around the table as you walk them through this. Was it that it was a coat, or was it the meaning behind the coat that made the friction in the family off the charts? See what your kids have to say about that. Well, why don't we just go ahead and jump in. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan. So we left Jacob as he was on the run. Now we're jumping back into the story many, many years later, where he has not just one wife, but he has two wives because of the crazy family scenario that took place when he finally arrived at his uncle's after the latter vision that he had while sleeping on the rocks that we talked about yesterday. So here now, many years later, he's in the land of Canaan, probably been there about 10 years or so, where his father, Isaac, had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. So from the very beginning, we are clued in that the story has now shifted to Jacob fully, and we're going to begin to talk about family. This is a family story with a family dynamic. God promised there would be a big family, and in big families, there are always drama, and Jacob is the first one to have that big family that God promised would only get bigger to Abraham. So when Joseph, who is Jacob's son and Abraham's great-grandson, when Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. So he was employed. He was a worker, essentially, for his father and his father's business and the family business. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things that his brothers were doing. So a lot is being said here. Like I said, Jacob had two wives. Leah, first wife, had a number of sons with her, 10, if my count is correct there. And then with Rachel, two sons. Rachel was the favorite wife. We don't have time to get into the whole multiple wives thing today. Okay, so you're just going to have to stick a pin in that and let it ride. Story as it is, two wives. So that's why there are half brothers. Rachel being Jacob's favorite wife, the oldest son born to Rachel, not the oldest son in the family, but the oldest son born to his second wife, Rachel, is Joseph. And Joseph is special. Favoritism. Favoritism has been in Jacob's life. If we go back to the story of Jacob and Esau, Jacob's mom played favorites between he and his brother. And so what we see here are the ripple effects in the successive generations that have begun in the past. Abraham did this as well between Isaac and Ishmael. Sarah did this. Isaac's mom between Isaac and Ishmael. And so the family pattern continues. We may think that the things that we do in raising our children are minor, but may not realize that some of those minor things to us create ripple effects that go into the homes where our grandchildren grow up, and now for Abraham, great-grandchildren, that those things can repeat themselves if not mitigated, minimized, squashed in our own lives and in our own families. We can see here that there is already strife and tension as Joseph runs back to dad to report some of the bad things his brothers were doing. We're not told what those bad things are. What we are told, though, is that there is tattletelling going on, right? And here we go. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age and also had been born to him by his favorite wife, Rachel. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. I'm wearing this number one dad shirt almost as a joke this morning because Jacob was not, I don't think, a number one dad. Now, it's easy to look at some slices of somebody's story and make a judgment call about their entire existence here as a father and be wrong. But it seems as though some of these errors that Jacob made were not minimal or minor errors, but were catastrophic errors that changed the trajectory of the story for Joseph, changed the trajectory of the story for Jacob, certainly changed the trajectory of the story of the lives of his brothers as well. These family systems that Jacob put in place with favoritism cause long-term problems, and family systems can cause long-term problems, and every family has a system. Healthy, unhealthy, somewhere on the spectrum in between those two things. Jacob, I don't think we would say was a number one dad. This shirt I bought for myself. I don't know what that says about me as a father, that I had to buy a number one dad shirt for myself. But I bought this shirt for myself. And this kind of feels a little bit like something that Jacob would do. He's just going to be who he is. He's going to feel like he's the number one dad, and he's going to raise his kids the way that he wants. That, in this story, causes some issues. Now, the coat that he bought for him, we kind of imagine it as this amazing Technicolor dream coat, right? This coat of many colors. Over the years, this idea by biblical scholars has kind of been squashed, and that probably wasn't necessarily what made this coat special. Now, it may have been very colorful. It may have been made of the finest threads and fabrics from the places that caravans would have been traveling to and from between Egypt and between the East. We don't know. Could have looked like that, but it wasn't really, I think, the design of the coat or the expense of the coat that was the real issue. Obviously, the fact that it seems as though Joseph received a coat and no one else did, that is the issue here. Probably didn't matter whether or not it had come from a thrift store. It was that favoritism, that it was a symbol of favoritism, that made it problematic. Not so much perhaps the expense or the cost, though if it were an expensive coat, if it was an extraordinarily unique coat, that certainly would have added to the offense, right? The other thing that scholars have said about this, which is likely and probable, not just possible, is that this was a sign of management, that this coat would have been worn by somebody who was in charge. If Joseph was tending his father's flocks, involved in the family business, the other brothers were as well, this likely signifies that he was a manager, not just a laborer. That tends to make a lot of sense in what we will continue to read in this chapter, in that Joseph seems to have a positional perspective of authority over his brothers, which extends perhaps not just to being within the family, not that he's just the lead dude in the family, even though he's 11th out of 12 in the birth order, he still is first in favoritism and authority among the brothers in the family. But it may also be as well that when it came to the financial business of the family business, that he also is a manager who is placed over top of his brothers in authority as well. That makes a lot of sense as to why this coat was an issue, because it doesn't just point to the favoritism that was always there. He got the best piece of steak. He got the best Christmas gift. He got more of his father's time than any of the others. That's a normal family system. But add in a family system of business where he's also managing and in charge of them, and that is a two-edged sword that is very difficult for anybody to swallow, especially in a patriarchal society where there was an order in which these things happened, and birth order was extremely important. And Jacob breaking that is essentially saying, I'm choosing not to be number one dad. I'm choosing to do whatever I want. So his brothers, verse 4 says, hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. Thanks, Dad. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Now, we're not told in this moment what that dream was. I don't think. Let's keep reading. But he has multiple dreams, and in each of those dreams, he's in charge. And dreams in those days weren't just dreams, like we learned yesterday. Dreams in those days were visions from God. They were theophanies. They were moments or opportunities where the gods or where God could speak directly to humanity. And so they were taken seriously. And the brothers, did they think that Joseph was making up these dreams in order to raise his status in the family and in the world? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Everybody would have taken Joseph's dream seriously, except for his brothers, whether or not it had actually happened. And we'll make an assumption that those dreams had actually happened. His brothers respond, "So you think you will be our king, do you?" So you see now this progression from favoritism and leadership in the family, favoritism and leadership now in the business. Oh, well, that's not good enough for Joseph. Now Joseph's dreams are telling him that he's going to be our king, that he's going to rule over top of us in a way in which none of us have any say whatsoever in our own lives unless we go through Joseph. "Do you actually think you'll reign over us?" they ask, and they hated him all the more because of his dreams. And get this, the way that he talked about them. It wasn't just that Joseph had the dreams. It wasn't just that Joseph was the favorite. It was also that Joseph knew it and played it to his advantage. I think there is a possibility that had Joseph not been self-righteous, self-focused, a brat who knew he was the center of attention of his father and played it to his advantage in the early years, I think if that had not been the case, he might have had an opportunity with his brothers to create some sort of relationship where they all understood that their father did this and that it wasn't okay, but that Joseph did not take advantage of it. But it seems as though Joseph took advantage of it, and that was a relationship killer. That is a family destroyer, because now you've got the father doing it, who's in authority. Now you've got Joseph doing it, who's given authority. A recipe for disaster. Oftentimes on social media, especially on Twitter, whenever I'm responding to people who have done something especially egregious or out of line, I'll say, do better. You know better, do better. And if you didn't know better, you should know better and now know better. So do better. I essentially would like to just grab Joseph by the collar of that coat and shake him and just say, do better. This is not okay. I'd like to do the same thing to Jacob. Jacob, unfortunately, probably is not going to change. Joseph, on the other hand, is young enough to change and should be old enough to see the long-term ramifications of his playing this game and what they will do. Do better. And I think this is a message to us as well in our lives and how we treat other people and how we see ourselves and how we take advantage of opportunities that may be afforded to us, but that we should not avail ourselves of. Do better. Your life may not have gone the way that you planned, but that won't stand in the way of God's plans. Now, I say that because as you continue, and like I said, I hope that you will, reading today's story, Joseph's life in the beginning is many dreams of things that will come true, but because of the way that Joseph acts and treats other people, his life takes a tragic turn into a very dark journey that lasts years, decades. God uses that for God's good and Joseph's good and the family's good. I don't think, though, any of those things needed to take place. I see that as God redeeming a very broken story and a very broken person, Joseph, and he'll do the same for us as well. As I was reading some commentaries and some writings, kind of thinking through this study, I was amazed at the number of people who wrote off Joseph's behavior. He's receiving visions from God of greatness. His father has given him this coat, which means he probably deserved it. We see the end of Joseph's life and how God uses Egypt in order to save the family whenever there's famine. We see the repair and the forgiveness here. I'm not so ready to write off how Joseph acted. I'm not so ready to say that Joseph was in the right and the brothers were in the wrong. The brothers did wrong things. Joseph deserved them. Joseph was a donkey. I want to use the King James word there. Joseph could have avoided years and years and years of disconnection from his family, of pain and heartache, by doing better early on. Now, depending on what Joseph's age was, we can make a determination as to whether or not Joseph was really able to do that or not. But I think let's make an assumption here that Joseph, if he knew enough to know that he was doing this to his brothers, and the text tells us that, then he was old enough to know that he shouldn't have been doing it and that there would be consequences for his actions. But he thought his dad was protect him until he got sold off into slavery into Egypt. Your life, like Joseph's, may not have gone as you planned. And like Joseph, you may bear responsibility for the way your life went. You may look at it and say, it was not outside influences. It was not my brothers or sisters. They might have been involved. But at the end of the day, it was my actions that caused these outcomes in a lot of ways. And if I would have acted differently, if I would have done better, if I would have made other choices, I don't know that this would have been where the path led. And I'm not sure that this was the preferable path. I think through today's chapter, that would have been the words that Joseph would have written and would have said as well. But the wonderful thing that we see here is that God redeems this storyline. God redeems this tragic path and uses it for good. Doesn't mean that the brokenness and the heartache and the pain and the lost years are taken away. The discipline is still there. The reality of the effects of our actions are still there, but God weaves it together for his good and for yours as well. He does that for Joseph. He'll do that for you. And that, I think, is the story of Advent. The story of the birth and the coming of Jesus Christ is the story of God actually doing this. As we continue to move forward, we're going to see that humanity does not follow what I think God's plan was. And they find themselves at the turn of the New Testament in a place where all hope is lost because of the tragic decisions and things that have been done. And yet, somehow, surprisingly, miraculously, in Bethlehem, God redeems the plan, looks at the brokenness and says, I can't take away all of that heartache that you went through, but what I can do is jump tracks and put things back in the direction that they should be. That's the story of Advent. It's the story of Jesus. And that's the story of Christmas. Until tomorrow.